questions about what I'm expecting for this assignment, where I want you to talk about how you're using the planning skills in the character traits lesson plan. What I'm going to do now is just go over another example to clarify what I want you to do and give you a handle on the expectations. So let's assume that I was doing this with the animal symbiosis lesson plan that we've looked at before. As we recall, I said I want you to think of this as though you were with a cooperating teacher and they gave you this lesson plan and said, here, you're going to teach this, next week or tomorrow. Here's the lesson plan that I used last year. Use it as a starting point, but do whatever you want, right? What I want you to do with it is, one, make sure that you don't just have one simple overall learning objective, that you break it down into smaller sub-goals. And then I want you to also introduce a general plan, not to this level of detail, something much more like this, and I'll get to that in a minute. But using the teacher's lesson plan as a starting point, you look at the objective, right? Students will be able to describe the 3 different types of symbiotic relationships. And then you see that, well, they're going to introduce the idea of symbiosis, and then they're going to talk about 3 different kinds, and then they're going to write a poem, and then they're going to make a different column, and they're going to try to apply these ideas, and there's some differentiation. Then there's an assessment at the end, and then students read their poems out loud for 15 minutes at the end. Now, you can stick to this pretty closely if you want, or you can modify it. But the first thing I want you to do is think that, one, what does this overall goal really amount to, and how can it be broken down? And so as a sample, and again, you could do this in slightly different ways. The overall goal that I would have, I wouldn't want it. This seems like a basic recall goal. She has a basic kind of recall test at the end. I would want this to at least be some kind of comprehension, maybe application. And actually, I should put that in here. My lesson goal would be, I want them to be able to describe the 3 different types of symbiotic relationships, and I'm going to call this comprehension application. So one thing I need to do is basically deconstruct what I mean by this, because I could mean what she means, that I just want them to list the definitions, but I don't. I don't want my students to just have memorized stuff at the end of the day. I want them to be able to do something with it. So my first goal is, one, I want them to be able to explain what symbiotic relationships are. This would be a comprehension level goal. I want them to also define each type at a comprehension level. And finally, I want them to be able to apply them to their own lives. Okay. So what this means, right, is that I want, if I'm not just asking them to be able to regurgitate a definition to me, they need to be able to relate it to different ideas, things that it's not, things that it's like, but not quite, provide some other examples, answer some questions about them. Then I want them to be able to recognize that we can put the different types of relationships between species into different kinds of categories, and that we define these and try to make sure that they can differentiate them from things like, parasitism isn't predator-prey type relationships. It isn't an involve murder or just killing something or scavenging or decomposing something, right? There's a specific element to parasitism that makes it slightly different. So I'd want to make sure that students had a firm grasp of this concept. Finally, then, I'd want them to flex these concepts to different areas of their own lives, something that she did, and I think that's a really nice idea. But that's part of the bigger goal, and I want to be able to assess whether or not they can do that, not just whether they can write the definitions of the different terms and give examples that we talked about. That's a pure recall task. So to do that, right, so let me back up just a second. So this is the first part, right? Thinking about, what does my overall goal really mean, and how do I break it down then into sub-goals? The reason we're doing this is to really kind of set up the learning progression and make sure that everything that we do then is in alignment with those goals. There are other elements of the meaningful context, using student assets and all that other stuff comes in here. But the main thing that we're trying to do is establish what is the progression of ideas, how am I going to build student knowledge. The plan then that I came up with, and again, I don't need a ton of detail, a couple sentences is okay, just clarify it. So goal 1A, describing what symbiosis is. I would introduce the idea of symbiosis. I would ask students about different relationships that they have, the great ones, the okay ones, the terrible ones. We would describe what makes them good or bad. Then we would explain the idea of symbiosis in that it's a relationship that's ongoing between two living things, typically different species, not relationships between living and non-living things or between two non-living things, right? The planet going around, or the Earth going around the sun, is not a symbiotic relationship in the pure sense of the term. My relationship with my desk or my computer is not a symbiotic relationship. We would then go through multiple examples to determine, I don't know why this is, sure, whatever. I would go through different examples to make sure that they understand the idea. The second thing then is that I want them to be able to say that, well, there are different kinds. And we talked about good or bad relationships. And so when I was introducing the idea here, I'm thinking ahead to setting this up. And so I would create a table and we would go over a bunch of different situations and different types of relationships that exist in nature. I would describe them, and then they would have to, as a class, decide what goes into what column. Then maybe I would put them in small groups. Maybe they would do it independently for a bit and then we'd come back and compare. Not sure. But that's a general idea. I'd give them a bunch of repetitions with this to get this concept in their heads. Finally, then, I'd want them to come back and revisit all those good and bad relationships we talked about in the beginning of class and try to classify those as mutualistic, commensalistic, or parasitic. And that gets me all the way back to my overall lesson goal. Now, once I've thought that through, and this is what I want you to do in the groups, and if you haven't done it yet or you haven't come to a conclusion yet, that's okay. I put the Wednesday deadline in there just to get people talking, otherwise people wait to the weekend and it's too hard to schedule. So if you haven't gotten this far yet, that's fine. But you really do need to come up with a set of common goals and a general plan, because that is what will allow you to talk about alignment, the learning progression, the meaningful context, the assessment plan, and everything else you need to talk about. Okay, now I hope that helped. Again, this is the first time we're doing this. I don't expect things to be awesome for everybody. I expect some people to be awesome. I expect some people to be terrible. But the idea is that I will be giving group feedback. So I'm going to pick some really good ones, some not so good ones, some common mistakes, give that, and then we're going to do this again. But the goal of this is to make sure that you can actually talk about this stuff. And when you get to the NTPA, you are not kind of just spinning your wheels, not knowing what in the world you should say. So think of it as, kind of a building block approach to getting you ready to talk about it in the NTPA, talk about it in job interviews, use it in your daily life as a teacher. Okay, if you have any questions, shoot me an email. I'll try to clarify it some more. I don't want to give you examples of what I would put in here at this point because I really do want to see where you're at and what you come up with on your own. Okay, have a great night.